Hi, this is Christy, and I'm here to present this week's figure, Joan of Arc, the Maiden of Orleans. Joan was born around 1412. She was born to parents, Jeanne d'Arc was her father, and Joan died at the age of 19 in the year 1431. She was the daughter of a tenant farmer, Jacques Arc, from the village of Dormy in northeastern France. She was illiterate. She was never taught to read or write. But her mother took very great interest, was a very pious woman, in bringing her up to love and observe faith in the Catholic Church. And her mother was a great influence on her membership and participation and her great affection for the Catholic Church. At the age of 16, Joan's father attempted to make a marriage match for her. Joan, for reasons we will soon discover, did not want to be married, and she petitioned the local court asking to not be forced to marry. She went to the local court and said, "Marriage is not for me. I don't wish to be married." And the local court found in her favor, and she was allowed to refuse the marriage match her father had made for her at the age of 16. The 100 Years' War was going on in Joan's world. At that time, it was a long world with England, and England was winning. It had started over a bitter disagreement about succession to the French throne. The French militarily were positioned with quite an advantage and should have been winning this war, but were not. What Joan would have witnessed around her were frequent raids of her hometown when she was a child. She also would have witnessed that her village was being burned to the ground. The English at that time were considered illegitimate invaders and occupiers. So Joan had quite an early start to the story of what would become her military career. At the age of 13, she had begun to hear voices, plural, not just one voice, and she attributed it to a number of Catholic saints. And these saints, or these voices, were telling her that it was her calling and her job to save France by expelling its enemies from its borders. 16 years old when she petitioned to go solve the siege at Orleans. So she first went and asked if she could be allowed to go to battle and go to Orleans and relieve the siege there that was not getting very far. They were stuck, and the French were not doing so well. And she said, "I must be at the king's side. There will be no help for the kingdom, if not for me. And although I would rather have remained spinning wool at my mother's side, yet I must go, and I must do this thing, for my Lord wills that I do so." So she made it her case that she was explicitly told by these voices, these experiences, that the Lord willed her to go and help save France. She was refused initially. She then predicted a military reversal at the Battle of Rouvray. She attributed this prediction days ahead of time when the military leaders would have gotten note about the results of the battle, and she attributed the accurate prediction to grace divine that she experienced in a vision while tending her flocks in Lorraine. She had been rebuffed, but during this rebuffal, I don't know if that's a word, we'll make that a word, and after the prediction of the Battle of Rouvray, she gathered a following with some people of influence, and they believed that she fulfilled a local prophecy of a virgin that would be a deliverer. So she was given a blessing locally to move on to the crown prince in Chinon. She cut her hair short. This will become important. She dressed in men's clothes and posed as a page boy as a precaution and made the 11-day journey to Chinon. Joan arrived and was granted audience with Charles, and she told Charles that he would be crowned at Reims, which was kind of the point of this war, was to have him take the crown and be legitimately enthroned at Reims. Charles, against all of his advisors, everybody said this is a very bad idea, had given a private audience to Joan of Arc and approved an army and gave her his blessing to attempt to relieve the siege at Orleans. She was 17 at the time. She was made the head of the army and equipped with donated armor, weapons, sword, horse, and her banner being a very important thing to her. Stephen Ritchie, the historian, says that after years of one humiliating defeat after another, both the military and civil leadership of France were demoralized and discredited. When the Dauphin Charles granted Joan's urgent request to be equipped for war and placed at the head of the army, his decision must have been based in large part on the knowledge that every rational option had been tried and had failed. Only a regime in the final straits of desperation would pay any heed to an illiterate farm girl who claimed that the voice of God was instructing her to take charge of her country's army and lead it to victory. And here is a picture of Joan beginning to rally her troops at Orleans. And you'll notice she is dressed in men's armor. She has her banner and her horse, and that her armor and her clothing is predominantly shown to be in white, and that was very much on purpose. So there was resolution at the siege of Orleans. Joan of Arc had arrived on the scene. She turned the Anglo-French War into a religious war. After all, she was sent by God. Her life, background, and character were thoroughly examined. There was a fear that if she was not above reproach, that Charles would be accused of having gained the crown by way of the devil. So they investigated her very deeply, her character, her background, her story, her morals, her theology, and it was determined that she was all above board. Charles was then told by the Dauphin that to abandon Joan would be an offense against the Holy Spirit itself. She led a charge into Orleans. She suffered a very serious injury of an arrow between her neck and shoulder, but she rallied herself. She returned to lead an assault that took the fortress Les Tourelles. The English retreated the next day, and the siege at Orleans was over. Joan continued on to Paris, capturing towns and villages with little or no opposition from the English. Her reputation preceded her. They fell her way. Of course, she was captured. That's the story. It's kind of like the Titanic. We know the Titanic sinks. Joan was captured. The French revered her with her military victories, and they were numerous. And she garnered the support of the Archbishop of Embrun and different French theologians. The English, however, believed that she was possessed by the devil because a peasant girl defeating the great English army, it wasn't just simple propaganda that the English proposed. The idea, just the very idea that God supported the French through Joan, was unbelievable. It was beyond their imagination that this 17-year-old girl could bring down one of the greatest armies in Western Europe. She was eventually captured at Compiègne. She was locked in a tower. Joan, being a quite feisty person, attempted to escape the tower. She jumped 70 feet into a moat. They caught her again. The English locked her up in another tower in ruin, where the tower is now the Tower of Joan of Arc, where she was held as prisoner during her interrogation for the trial that was soon to come. And the French continually tried to help her escape from that tower. Charles, the king, threatened vengeance on the English and English women for their maltreatment of Joan, and she was maltreated. Her trial was politically motivated and run entirely by English clerics. Joan's request for French clerics to balance out her accusers and for French clerics to be present was flatly denied. The tribunal attempted to set a theological trap for her to commit heresy. It was believed at that time that no one could be 100% assured of being under grace. So the tribunal asked if she was under grace, and Joan replied, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." This left her accusers just gobsmacked. She was illiterate and uneducated and did not fall for their theological trap. It should be noted she was kept in a secular prison guarded by men instead of nuns. That was against the law. The tribunal had tricked her into signing a fake confession and altered much of her permanent trial record. Charges of cross-dressing were brought against Joan of Arc when heresy didn't quite stick, if you will. She was charged with multiple counts of cross-dressing. Medieval church law required that charges of cross-dressing be considered inside of context. Some of this is laid out in St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. Joan of Arc dressed as a page boy for safe passage through enemy territory. This would have been legal. She was dressed as a man while in battle and encamped with her soldiers. Also legal. It was for her protection. She dressed in men's clothing in prison to prevent being raped by her guards. This was also legal, and again, she should have been guarded by nuns, not men. She always wore a dress when men's clothing wasn't necessary for her protection, but yet she was found guilty of multiple counts of cross-dressing and sentenced to die in 1431. Her execution, May 30th, 1431, she was tied to a tall pillar at the Vaux Marche in ruin. She asked for a crucifix to be displayed in front of her. She also put a small wooden cross in front of her dress. After she died, the English raked back the coals to expose her charred body so that no one could claim she had been escaped alive. Her body was burned twice more to reduce it to ashes and prevent any collection of relics. Her remains were thrown in the Seine River. Her executioner stated that he greatly feared being damned. She was retried posthumously at the order of Pope Calixtus III. The re-examination of her trial, she was determined to be innocent and declared a martyr. Her accuser was considered to have committed heresy in falsely charging her with the cross-dressing. The technical reason for her execution was a violation of biblical clothing law. It was determined that doctrinal exceptions to that clothing law had failed to be taken under consideration. Joan of Arc was beatified in 1920, 489 years after her execution. Joan was convinced that God gave her a mission to reclaim France in the name of the Catholic Church. She had grown up watching English occupation and terrorizing of her village. She was chosen by the king out of desperation, not qualification. She was single-minded in her mission, which fired up devotion and passion for her campaigns. Her military success reinforced this belief, the belief that she was divinely guided. King Charles believed that God had fulfilled a prophecy through her, and she remained faithful to the Catholic Church to the point of martyrdom. And here is a bibliography of some interesting sources and videos to further expand on Joan of Arc. Thank you very much.